Hello everyone. In this tutorial we will see how to create a material preset in Substance Painter, or how to define a fill layer, setting the textures for base color, normal and the other information channels, and how to save it in the materials section of the shelf, so that it can be used in other Substance sessions. The tutorial was made with the 2019 version of Substance Painter, but the topics covered are also valid in other versions of the software. It is a basic tutorial, which takes for granted some concepts covered in the video tutorials previously published on my channel. Okay, we said that we want to create a material preset, in such a way as to find a single material element, with a single layer, and not a group of elements, possibly provided with filters, levels or generators based on textures, as it happens with smart materials. The goal is to create such an element and drag it into the layer stack of our project, to apply it entirely or in part to our objects, via layer masks. Before proceeding, however, let's think for a moment on why we should do such a thing, given that we can create smart materials that, at least at first, seem to be much more flexible. In fact, smart materials can include various layers and materials, in some cases with filters, layers or generators based on maps created with Bake or other tools. The first reason that comes to my mind to create a simple material preset is the need to create a material starting from external textures images. For example, base color, normal and roughness images obtained from photographs, scans or, why not, made manually, by yourself or by others. And perhaps they will be seamless textures, which can be repeated several times on a surface without showing some obvious joints. In this and other cases there is no need to resort to a smart material, but it is sufficient to import the textures in the Substance session, from File Import Resources, specifying the type texture for the files and importing in current session, as there is no need to save these files in the shelf, since we will store a material. To create an empty fill layer, selecting only the channels that interest us in the Properties Fill section of the tool shelf. I use the PBR metallic workflow, so I am selecting color, metal, roughness, normal, height and opacity, the latter just to tell Substance that my material, in this example, is not transparent. To drag the imported textures into the fill layer, in the corresponding channel, of course, or to set the values to be applied uniformly to the entire surface. For example, in my case, I can set 1 for the opacity channel. Finally, to right-click on an empty area of the Properties, Fill tab and then click on Create Material Preset in the window that will appear on the screen. Done. The material thus created will be available immediately in the Materials section of the shelf and can be used, like any other Substance-based material, in this and other projects. A material can also be created starting from a smart material, thus obtaining a packed version of the same, a bit like it happens in drawing and photo editing softwares by collapsing the stack of layers, merging them into a single layer. This can be useful, for example, to save computing resources, and even disk space in the project file, in fact, in very complex scenes. And here is the second reason covered in this tutorial, for which I will use a little more complicated example. Suppose we have many individual 3D objects available, each with its Substance project, in which, in turn, we can find one or more materials or smart materials, and we want to compact everything into a single object with a single texture set. This is an operation that I have personally done several times, combining many assets into single elements, or with a single texture set, to use fewer resources in real-time applications. In this case, I start with a 3D graphics software, Blender in my case. With these operations, I insert the 3D models in a Blender scene, remove all the original materials and assign a new material to the objects, the same material, shared by everyone. Then, I resize and move the UV layouts of these objects so that they fit into a single UV space, in order to have no overlapping parts. it is advisable to resize the various UV maps in proportion to the size of the objects in the scene. So for example, a pen can occupy a considerably smaller UV surface than the one reserved to a small table. Before exporting, I decide whether to merge all the objects into one or whether to leave them separate, but letting them share the same UV space and the same material. Anyway, the choice is dictated by the use that I will have to make of this set of objects. If, for example, in the final application the whole set will be in the background, and it will never happen that you have to move, rotate or remove the elements individually, then I merge all the objects into a single object. Otherwise I keep them as they are. Finally, I export everything to disk in an FBX file. In Substance Painter, now, I have to proceed in several stages, because first I will have to create materials for each individual object, as seen in the first example of this tutorial, after which I will have to insert these materials into the project and transform them to adapt them to the new UV layout. The first part of the work can be a bit boring, as I will have to open every single Substance project and export the set of PBR metallic textures as images on disk, in a temporary folder. This will have to be done for each project, but there is a positive side. When I create the material preset starting from these textures, I will do it once and I will find it in the library also in the future, so this operation must basically be done once for each asset in your library. Once you have made all the exports you need, you can finally create a new Substance project with the set that we want to texturize and which will be equipped with a single material, created by assigning the various materials, resized, moved and without UV wrap repetitions, in the Properties, Fill tab, to parts of the UV layout. Even if the various layers and effects of the original materials of the individual objects are no longer available, we can still add filters and other effects to these fill layers. In the end, we will be able to export the whole texture set, getting a model and the textures images for a single material. Well, that's all for this video tutorial. As usual, I invite you to express doubts, questions or requests for clarification in the comments to the video, on YouTube.